Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Sam Shea. I'm a chiropractor and Fitgenes practitioner doing telemedicine, functional testing, and functional medicine. And I have the great honor of interviewing Dr. Beaver, PhD. And he is the Chief Science Officer and co-founder of Fitgenes. And we're talking about genetics today. And specifically, Dr. Beaver has put together several panels, the main one being the Health and Wellbeing panel, which is a complete breakthrough in how we can understand genes in a practical and usable and immediate way, as opposed to, I think, some people's or a lot of people's experience. They run their 23andMe or their Ancestry, and all they get is just a giant pile of information that's not organized or prioritized. And Dr. Beaver has just fundamentally changed the game with that. So I just want to hand it over to you, Dr. Beaver. Thank you so much for joining us. And please share your genetics superhero origin story, how you got involved in genetics and how you came about to the organization you did of the gene panels.
No worries. And keep it to Paul. I'm happy I'm not
okay,
into
Paul. Sure.
Well, my journey started in 1978 where I was planning to become an engineer and I was studying, doing my PhD. Our family dropped a bombshell on us and let us know that my father at 52 had cancer, would be dead in 3 months. Now, my grandfather lived to 84, my great-grandfather lived to 92, and this was a bolt out of the blue. Dad didn't want to die in the hospital, he wanted to die at home, and he lived for 18 months, and it was a very ugly time. They couldn't give him enough heroin, cocaine, or morphine to kill the pain, so it was a horrible time. He got to die in his own bed, and I was with him. We got over that. Then 8 years later, my wife gave birth to our daughter, cuddled my daughter, cuddled my wife. And I literally got 5 minutes out of the delivery room and our family doctor dropped the second bombshell. He said, go to this other hospital 15 minutes away. Your mum has a cancerous growth the size of a rock melon. She'll be dead in less than 3 months. So I went life to death in 20 minutes, cuddling my wife, my daughter, and my mum. That was the turning point in my life where I found my purpose, in that I realised we can keep people alive, we can't keep people healthy. And someone was being a little bit maybe cynical, saying we've got very good at keeping people alive so they can spend the last 20 years of their life taking medications. And I just believed that we were missing somewhere. And so I spent the next 20 years of my life talking to doctors, nutritionists, naturopaths all over the world, and it came back to our genes. And during that 20 years, though, people kept saying, aren't you worried you'll die of cancer like your mum and your dad? And my faith and belief was, that's not who we were meant to be. And then I found in 2006 the new science of nutrigenomics. I travelled all the way from Australia to America and got one of the very first genetic tests that went direct to consumer. We had 4 SNPs out of the millions and billions of variations. And we had 4 and we thought, wow, we've made it. But what I found then was I got a book called It's Not Just Your Genes, that my genes are not my destiny. And I found about the new science of nutrigenomics that I can't change the genes that I got from my mum and dad, God love them, but I could change the signal that many of the genes send out which control how my body functions. And that's the science of nutrigenomics. And I saw research in using natural nutrients to change the signal the genes send out. And then since 2006, I've just devoted my life to bringing a new approach where it was a message of hope, not fear, doom and gloom. It's not like you've got the BRCA1 gene for breast cancer or the ApoE gene, you're going to get Alzheimer's or any of these other genes. It was that we do have some control over it. Now, I'm not trying to downplay. There are some very strong single, rare, monogenic single genes that affect diseases. That's not where we live. The number of genes that we do have some control over is important, but it varies. Without the blueprint of what your genetic profile is, you don't know what's the most appropriate nutrition, exercise and lifestyle that you need to take, not the Joe Blow next door. And that's why most diets and that don't work as effectively. We're treating everyone the same, whereas we should treat everyone individually based on their profile. And so what we did is I designed our first panel back in 2006, which was aimed at the genes that affect how our body functions at the cellular level. Mm-hmm. And that's the engineer in me. I think in systems that our whole body is determined by the health of the single cells. Healthy cell, healthy tissue, healthy organ, healthy body. So it's about cell health and getting the genes that make up who we are, sending out the right signals to control the amount of how we cope with starch, or how much our arteries contract, or how much how we metabolize coffee. That's what we need to do, and then reset the gene to what is relevant to us.
Everyone has a real inspiration as to why they're looking at genes. Yours was, it's pretty harrowing to get those bits of news in that quick succession, and then really turning to devote your career to it. And what I appreciate is that you've taken your engineering mind to what's been thought of as a kind of a biological construct. And I think of engineers as people who can look at a whole situation, line all the pieces together up in a predictable order to get predictable, meaningful results in a timely, predictable manner. And that what you've done is created a methodology to analyze genetics in a comprehensible and, more importantly, practical way. And I'd love for you to talk about how you decided, because the gene panel has certainly expanded from 4 genes. We're now at 64. And I would love for you to share about how you decided on those 64 as it relates to the drivers of diseases, and also why are we even doing this? Why are we even doing gene testing? Is it because we're not just looking for a specific gene, we're looking at global systems of genes, but also why are we even doing that?
Well, I think a couple of points to frame it up. The more genes are not better, that there's 25,000 genes and millions of variations, yet there is only solid science behind about 300 genes and their variations. So a lot of this more is better is ridiculous. The second thing is, when we designed the original panel, it had to be around how our body functions at the cellular level, number one. There had to be solid science around that to prove it. There's a lot of things out there. There is no evidence behind it. It also had to be more than 10% of any ethnic population. There's no point having 0.01% of a gene that maybe Eskimos have or something like that. We wanted something that would reach the majority of the ethnic populations. But more importantly, there had to be scientific evidence-based research around the interventions with nutrition, exercise and lifestyle. And having used that approach, and what I call a systems biology approach, the Health and Wellbeing panel has stood the test of time. It's used from Olympic athletes to people with high blood pressure, premenopausal women that are struggling with weight and getting through menopause. We've had government grants for research into autism, Alzheimer's, suicide. It covers a whole health spectrum. But it was designed primarily about helping people maximise their potential for healthy living and healthy ageing. And if you look at what controls our body, it comes back to the same drivers or biochemical processes: inflammation, oxidative stress, immune dysfunction, methylation. They're the same processes that underpin every health outcome, whether you're an Olympic athlete that's breaking down with injuries, whether it be you've got high blood pressure and you're getting atherosclerosis, hardening the arteries, and whether it be autism, they are the same fundamental drivers at the cellular level. So more genes are not better. You need to find what are the genes that control how our bodies function. And it's a bit like an army. The systems biology approach is all the genes are organised in a bit like the lights on a Christmas tree. Or you've got an army, you've got the generals, you've got the corporals, the captains, the foot soldiers. And how I designed it, I wanted to find out what were the generals or the major genes that control the inflammation pathway, the detox pathway, the fat metabolism pathway. And you get more benefit for having 64 generals than having 10,000 foot soldiers.
Right.
So that's how I designed it. And I was on a international 1 week forum about genetics and had some of the world leaders in functional medicine, and I was one of the 20 on that. And I put a cat amongst the pigeons, and I said, I want to just stop and just think about maybe you've been chasing a rabbit in medicine and it's called a disease, as I said diseases don't exist as, you've got to stop thinking of a disease as a physical entity. A disease is actually a symptom that fixed biochemical processes are broken. And one of your top doctors I love is Dr. Mark Houston from Vanderbilt Medical University, cardiologist. He said there's over 395 assaults on our cardiovascular system. 395, not 5 smoking, dyslipidemia and so forth. 395 medically proven. Every one of those comes back to inflammation, free radical damage, or affecting our immune system. He said the same thing with cancer. They all come back to the same biochemical processes. And we've seen that after I've trained over 1,200 doctors, cardiologists, gynecologists all over the world. And as you're one of them, as you know, you've been to our training, tens of thousands of people. And that the process works. If you find the fixed biochemical processes, we've had people that have been suicidal and then they said, well, my skin's improved, my energy level's improved. Because inflammation, oxidative stress and immune dysfunction underpin everything. And if you look at weight management, I remember one of your learned doctors in the mid-90s, he said that most weight management programs fail because they create more inflammation as a part of the process than trying to get rid of the fat metabolism. And so that works whether it be weight management, is inflammation, oxidative stress. You look at mental health, energy levels, they all come back to the same processes. So rather than chasing these rabbits called diseases, let's go and find the basic process and fix that. And the people, they lose weight, their skin improves, the energy level improves because it's a systems biology approach that has proven the test of time. And you know that from all the patients you've tested.
So that was wonderful. I think I just see if I can summarize everything down, that there are basically 4 criteria that came down to the 64 genes that you picked, and that more data, more genes is not better. Better organized and better prioritized genes is better. And right now what people are dealing with is when they want to get their genes tested, like it's the holidays are coming up, I want to check my Ancestry or whatever. It's like they get back however many dozens and hundreds of genes, and it's overwhelming and confusing. There's not an organization, there's not a prioritization, and there's not a pool of practical things to do that are based on solid research done on humans. So if I hear you correctly, there's 4 criteria to pick these 64 genes. One is that the genes had to be involved in one of the, you list 7 drivers of disease on the health and well-being panel, 7 drivers being inflammation, free radical damage, liver detoxification capacity, vitamin D utilization, methylation, cardiovascular circulation, and fat and energy metabolism. So that was one criteria. The second criteria is that of all the remaining genes, which of those are the generals or the upstream that control those drivers? The third criteria is that of those generals, which of them have variations in at least 10% of the general population? So we're not testing a super obscure gene at 0.001% or whatever. And then the fourth criteria is that each of those remaining genes had to have peer-reviewed research in high-end journals done on humans, not in other organisms, but shown in humans, that lifestyle, nutrition, diet alone is enough to beneficially shift the expression of the genes in a beneficial way to and those would be the 4 criteria that I'm hearing. Is that correct?
Summary. Okay. Absolutely.
And then
there have to be actionable outcomes.
In actual outcomes. And what's also amazing is that you've even prioritized the 64 genes. And this is something I've never seen before till I came to your work, is that the genes themselves are clustered in their order of priority as clusters. So like there's the first 15 genes are really potent, classically associated as inflammatory genes. Obviously they do more than inflammation, but they're really major inflammatory genes. And so what I'm able to do from a systems biology approach is look at, not is there a single variation of interleukin-6 or TNF-alpha, but of the 15 major genes, do I see a pattern of negative variation? And then I focus there, and then I can look at the software and the research and then find what is the fewest number of interventions, whether it's this person needs higher doses of fish oil, or they need to not over-exercise or overtrain because then they'll trigger an inflammatory response, and see which of the interventions cross-pollinate to multiple genes in that same cluster. So I'm not giving someone 300 health tips. I'm giving them, here is the top 7 things you can do. They're going to have the greatest number of beneficial effects on the highest priority genes in the gene clusters that you struggle the most with. And it's such a relief to people that I work with. They're like, oh, wow, now this is actually practical, and I can understand, and I can trust it because every single intervention linked to every single gene variation has a paper behind it, and we can thank you for that. I mean, how many thousands have you had to slog through at this point?
I hate to think, and that's why I didn't sleep at night. But we also have an incredible lab backing us up who's developed a new tool that in real time I can look at a single gene, look at the single SNP, and it interrogates 25 million articles on PubMed.
Yeah, you showed that to me when I visited the lab, when I visited you in Melbourne. You showed me that tool, and I think my response was like, Paul, you're holding out on me. Paul, come on.
It's coming through with fine-tuning it now.
You're holding this is the this is the most fun genetic toy like in existence right now to be able to drill into. Yeah. I think that was my exact words. You're holding out on me.
I know you got it now. We were just fine-tuning it.
Right.
But what you summed up is how much time you've saved by finding the top. You don't need more than 6 to 7 interventions, 2 to 3 maybe nutrigenomic, 2 to 3 nutrition, 1 or 2 lifestyle, 1 or 2 exercise. And if it's based on the blueprint of your genetic profile, the results we've seen have been staggering, absolutely staggering. Yeah. It's not a hit and miss. It's not the shotgun approach, which is out there if you don't have your own genetic profile done. And just picking up just one point, as you touched on, the genes don't act in isolation. They work in groups in a systems biology. And we had some cutting-edge research done in Auckland University that the genes don't work in isolation. They work together. The gentleman there has this massive computer database, and he looked at, we have 160 genes all up in our different panels. He looked at all of them, and he looked at 160 at random. The 160 SNPs at random only had 19 impacts on the body. When he looked at the 160 we have all up, he fell off his chair because in total they had 2,460 impacts on our body around immune system, inflammation, you just name it, organic acids. And he said, how did you do that? I said, I didn't sleep for many years and read tens of thousands of articles, and that's the end product of that.
Yeah, and that goes to those same criteria. You get an exponentiation of prioritization. I mean, this is all fancy Scrabble words or whatever, but you basically get, if you find the actual priorities, the genes that matter the most, the generals that matter the most, that are the most likely to have negative variants in the population, that also have all the peer-reviewed research done on humans to show the beneficial effect of the lifestyle changes, and then you cluster them together in their meaningful groupings that are focused on the main drivers. All those things just stack, and you get this logarithmic differential on how much effect you can have from these relatively few number of genes. You're talking about 64 out of roughly 25,000. I mean, you're looking at what are you looking at? Roughly 3 1,000ths of the entire genome. 3 1,000. I mean, if I'm doing that calculation correctly, if 25 genes is 1 1,000th, and you got 64, which is just shy of 75, so that's 3 1,000ths of the entire genome that we're focusing on in your panel that have an exponential effect, way bigger than you're not having a 3 1,000ths of an effect, So this is why I love your work so much, is because I know when I analyze someone's panel, I'm going to give them the absolute priorities and make it simple for them. Like when I look at all the lifestyle interventions, I just rank order them in the order of priority of what gene clusters need the most attention, and then give them the fewest number of interventions that have the greatest meaningful impact. And I want to ask you specifically about some specific, I know we talked about we shouldn't think of diseases, yet there's a reality to people getting very concerned, motivated, inspired, whatever it is, around a specific, when they hear a specific word, whether it's cardiovascular disease or it's the New Year's or the holidays, or they want to get trimmed up for summer, and they're concerned about weight loss. So even though we're trying to step away from necessarily diagnostic labels, it's still useful to think in those terms, because then it's kind of grounded in reality for people to really understand. So can we just talk about something like weight loss? And
Okay.
what I see in the gene panels and working with people is that I've even presented this at one of your conferences on inflammatory weight gain. I've seen basically 3 types of weight gain, and why there are three main reasons where people struggle to lose weight. One is that there's inflammatory weight gain, or it's a hormonal weight gain, or it's a caloric weight gain. And I see these in the health and well-being panel. Would you speak to weight gain as it relates to the health and well-being panel?
There is. Well, first of all, weight gain in today's society is an inflammatory problem primarily, not a fat metabolism problem. And I've seen so many, in particular, say, premenopausal women, where the weight just keeps going on and on as the estrogen levels start fluctuating. And they go after, reducing the calories and trying to burn fat. And what I've found is they've got excellent fat metabolism genes,
yes,
but the inflammatory genes were poor. And until you get the inflammation under control, you won't lose weight. And I just want to put also, talking about weight in perspective as well, I've just done a big project around cardiovascular health. And some of the people that came in were what you would consider overweight. They weren't the little stick figures, and especially, say, some of the women in their late 30s, early 40s. But their cardiovascular health was better than the thinner people. And I've just seen the scientific research that says that if you're overweight and your VO2 max and your aerobic capacity is up, your risk of a heart attack is less than being thin and not having VO2. So sometimes we've got to get away from being overweight's bad. It's all the lifestyle choices. But the main problem is with weight today is it's inflammatory. And this is what this doctor in the mid-90s taught me about, the inflammation being the problem with weight management, not fat metabolism, because a lot of the things that people are doing to try and burn fat create more inflammation. For example, one of the genes in the fat metabolism is called PPAR gamma, and it controls the amount of fat that our bodies store. Now, if you go on a low-calorie diet, what you tend to do is you shrink the fat cells down into a tight little ball, and then when you put the calories back in, they rebound bigger than when they started. It's like the people that have a yo-yo every time they go on a calorie-restricted diet. Now, the worst diet for people with that gene variant is the low-fat diet, because it's high carb. What they need is a modified Mediterranean-style diet where it's okay to have the fat in the diet and the good starches, not the white rice, wheat, and so forth. And so the genetic profile is blowing out some of the myths that people have had around weight management. And once you get the inflammation under control, the fat metabolism will take care of itself. And I think the best example I can give is, and I've learned this through love for my wife when she was going through that premenopausal stage. Mm-hmm. She was an elite athlete, modern 5 pentathlon at the national level, and the weight just kept going on and on, despite being a very intelligent, hard-working, exercising. Mm-hmm. Nothing worked. And so I must admit there was a bit of self-preservation in it. I spent 9 months researching women's health, and I did love my wife, I will put it. And I wanted to find out, why is it pre-menopause women have got a lower risk of heart attack than men, but post-menopause it's much higher. And when I learned that, I said, my gosh, women should get a Victoria Cross for getting through menopause. And so what happens is when estrogen levels fluctuate, inflammation goes around the body and it gets into the fat cell and it blocks the fat cell. And then so the fat cell can't dissolve. And then when you then what happens is the women then start trying to lose weight, go to the gym. It can create more inflammation if they're overtraining. The inflammation goes around the body, goes into the fat cell. Then the tummy gets bigger than the normal recommended they should have, then their tummy starts producing an extra 40% inflammation. It blocks the fat cells. And until you can get the inflammation under control, you'll never get the weight down. And that's why inflammation is the number one priority. And if you do that, then fat metabolism will take care of itself. And it doesn't matter whether it's cardiovascular health, it's the same drivers. And that's why it's important to have that inflammation first. And one of the biggest problems in today's society is the food that we ate when we were a hunter-gatherer that produced inflammation was a ratio of 2 to the food that gets rid of inflammation was a ratio of 2 to 1.
Mm-hmm.
Today, in the Western society, we can eat 30 to 40 times more food that produces inflammation than will get rid of it. The omega-6s.
Yeah, omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Yeah, I remember when I presented at the conference on inflammatory hormonal weight gain, what I observed, and I had two people I was working with. Both were they weren't women, but they were both men. But the more they exercised, the fatter they got, and also the more in pain they got. And they also developed gynecomastia, or colloquially man boobs. And when I saw that, the more pain and the more heavier they got, that must be inflammatory. Plus, they must have some sort of hormonal issue in their liver genes that makes them store estrogen. And so they're redistributing their fat onto their chest. And when I ran their genetics, they had near perfect calorie-burning genes, but their inflammatory genes were just a mess. And also they had the key genes in their liver, and you have 8 liver genes in your panel. They had the key ones associated with estrogen metabolism had negative variants. Plus they also had the NADPH CY beta, I believe is what it's called. Yeah, CYBA. They also had that, which was indicative for metabolic syndrome. And what I did with them is that number one, identified all the exogenous sources of estrogen, whether it was heated plastics, specific high spray vegetables, trading them out for organic or spray free, making sure that they avoided takeaways put in plastics, changing what type of, they had to go for takeaways, go to specific types, watch out for the plastic lid on coffee mugs because the heat hits the plastic and the estrogen mimickers calm down. Making sure that the cleaning products and so forth were free of estrogen, just basically trying to remove as much external sources of estrogen. But the primary thing was putting them on an anti-inflammatory lifestyle, an anti-inflammatory diet, telling them to back off on the exercise and not focus on exercise, but focus on movement, not as opposed to the Greatest Loser type exercise, which is pure punishment. Instead, it's just movement, and then put them on anti-inflammatory nutrients, anti-inflammatory diet, anti-inflammatory lifestyle. And one guy lost 20 kgs in a month, including the weight off of his chest, and one guy lost 1 kg a week for 16 weeks. And his belly completely normalized, the gynecomastia completely went away. And it wasn't about losing calories. It was about modulating inflammation and helping. He also had the hormonal weight gain as well, and removing the sources of liver stress, in this case exogenous estrogens, and putting him on an anti-inflammatory diet, which also, if modified a little bit, is basically a liver cleanse diet also. And because they were trying harder and harder to lose weight by exercising more and more and restricting their calories, and they just got fatter and in more pain and more frustrated. And so in real time, and on the genes, to get the specific on the genes, some of the big commonalities I saw were that their anti-inflammatory genes, the 3 interleukin-10s, they had negative variants, so they couldn't put out the fire of inflammation easily. Their vitamin D receptor genes all had variations on them as well. And the vitamin D, the VDR, last we spoke, you said it was over 1,000 genes, the VDR genes control by themselves, and that's inflammation and immunology. And I just saw this firsthand, not just with them, but with others since then, that really, because of the genes, the gene profile, it completely redirected the focus of how to lose weight. Now, their main focus was not only to lose weight, but to also be out of pain. And there was cosmetics for them involved as well. But as we both know, their health span, their quality of life, their ability to function and to be present for their friends and families, careers, and life purpose is going to be exponentially better, more present, more productive, and meaningful, even though their entry point into genes was weight. And I really want to thank you, because without this gene profile, they would not have been convinced that their weight was a problem of too little exercise and too many calories. And they would have just literally burned themselves out if they had not seen it written in the genes.
Yeah, I think that's important. And the thing I love is the number of, particularly women, when they see their profile, they've struggled with weight, they've gone to the gym, and we have what we call the back-off approach, that it's better for them to get out of the gym in the short term, as you said, move, because if they're flogging themselves like this, the Biggest Loser type mentality, they just create more and more inflammation. They need to back off, have spa saunas and massages to reduce the inflammation, then go back into the gym and maybe do resistance type work in a more balanced approach.
Yeah, absolutely.
We call the back off. But what I love is the women that when they do that, they say this is easy compared to what they're doing. Oh,
totally.
And the other thing I love the statement, when they see their profile, the ladies tend to say, I knew it wasn't me. They disassociate themselves from their profile. They knew that even though how hard they were trying, it wasn't them as their own being. It was their physical genetics that they didn't have that blueprint to be able to give them what they needed to do for themselves. And I love that statement. It wasn't me, but their genes are them. You know,
I had one case study in my practice where she had gotten a new trainer. And a trainer was very much in the Biggest Loser mentality of more exercise and pushing harder the better. And what happened is that her muscle tone started to wash out. She actually started to lose muscle tone. And on top of that, her hormone cycle got really, really weird, random bleeding and all sorts of stuff. And she called me and she's like, okay, something's really wrong here. This is the only thing that's changed. Please, let's recheck. Like, I didn't know this was going on until she called me. And she said, can you just recheck my genes to see if something's really going on here? So I rechecked it. And sure enough, she had kind of I call it the unholy inflammatory quadrinity, where she was over-initiating inflammation. I was under-clearing it, so her interleukin-10s were off. She over-initiated interleukin-1s, the TNF-alpha, interleukin-6. But she also had the VDRs, and also the HO-1, which is to me like it's put in the liver camp, but I see it more act inflammatory, where it just provokes the initiation. But what was really interesting with the hormone side of it, because why was she bleeding? Because I cannot explain her muscles washing out, because the more inflamed she got, the more the body retains water to dilute the toxic inflammatory chemicals. But why was she having the hormonal issue? And she had all three of her CRP genes had negative variants. Plus, she had some negative variants in her liver genes that controlled estrogen metabolism. So what was happening is that she was over-inflaming, and then she couldn't put it out, and it was just constantly cycling up. And then the liver had to make a choice between dealing with inflammation or dealing with hormones, and it was already struggling with dealing with inflammation. The body will pick choosing dealing with toxic inflammation over dealing with hormone metabolites any day of the week. So her hormone buildup got super wacky, and that's why she had all these weird menstrual issues, menstruation issues going on. So we did the same thing. We pulled back. I had a diplomatic yet stern phrasing for the trainer to just back it off, and then she normalized again. Once the inflammation dropped, her muscle tone returned, the weird dysregulation or cycle came back to normal. I seen this also. There was worked with an 18-year-old. She was aspiring to be a bodybuilder, and she was, because of these damn gym bunnies on YouTube who are just pushing all the tropes of exercise more and more and more and more. She was losing muscle tone, and she was breaking out in eczematic rashes, like psoriatic rashes. And it was the same thing. When we ran her genes, she had very similar profile. Her caloric burning was fine, but it was the inflammatory genes and the VDRs that were vitamin D receptors that were way off. And so once I convinced her, she was a bit addicted to exercise, just a bit. Once I convinced her to just back it off, her muscle tone returned and the psoriatic issues resolved. This is, of course, with changing of her diet to anti-inflammatory diet, dealing with some gut issues that were triggering inflammation as well, running some other functional tests to identify what was going on with her adrenals, and just it was kind of the whole thing was was focused around what are all the causes and contributors to inflammation. Put her on that anti-inflammatory approach, and suddenly she was back in game shape again.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing too, you touched on when the people train and they lose muscle. That's the genes in the panel. There's the gene called IL-6, IL-8, and the vitamin D receptors. If you overtrain, you stimulate more what's called creatine kinase, which then destroys the muscle. And so exactly what you said then was why they lost the muscle, the estrogen, and the inflammation all went up. It all sits in the panel, and it's just incredible how you're seeing, and the thousands of other practitioners have seen the power in those genes. I mean,
absolutely.
If you get those results, why do you need double, triple? It's just that's the way it was designed, and it's proven the clinical test of time over the last 12 years. But one other point I want to pick up, which the thread's been going through, we're talking about health outcomes, not curing diseases. It's all about health outcome. So to help the person reach their health goal, and I think that's very important because a lot of people, because losing weight motivates for a few weeks, and even the fear of dying only motivates for 4 to 6 weeks. But the joy of living motivates a lifetime. And for me, I didn't want to cure. My focus wasn't on cancer. My focus was on with my grandchildren. Our daughter-in-law just had our fourth grandchild.
Congratulations!
Thank you. It was lovely. So three girls now, one boy. So my reason for doing what I do is that I can maximise my potential for healthy living, healthy ageing, improve my health expectancy, which is different to life expectancy. I don't want to become the statistic that spend the last 18 years of my life with the disabilities, which is what happens to men in Australia, and 20 years for women. I've outlived my dad by 13 years already, which I just can't comprehend. But to me, it's getting the health outcome to stay healthy. And for me, it was all around the cancer was I don't detox as well as the average person, more prone to inflammation, and I don't have as good a natural antioxidant defense system. But every one of those I can overcome with the right nutrigenomic nutrition, exercise and lifestyle. And I only go to the doctor every 3 or 4 years, and he says, what are you doing to stay so healthy? And I'll sit and I'll eat a pizza, I'll have a glass of wine. I know I have a blueprint that I can stay in the game of healthy living, healthy aging. But my goal is it's not just to improve my detox, natural antioxidant defense system, reduce inflammation. I do that to reach my health goal of my family. And I think that's for Christmas. We've been talking, I'm coming back about, it's all about the best gift we can give to someone apart from our love, friends and family is help them have the best health outcome they can have. So everything comes out of our health. If you haven't got your health, you can't do, what can you do with your life?
Yeah, someone who has, I'm going to mangle the quote, is like someone who has great health has many goals. Someone who has poor health has but one goal.
Yep, absolutely.
And just going back to, you said you can have pizza and a glass of wine. Were you saying that because you understand your genes and you've created this fort of other lifestyle interventions based on your unique gene profile, that your resilience is way, way, way higher?
Absolutely.
And that you can have the occasional assault on your health because your lifestyle is so good in all the other respects because you've done the work with your gene panel. Did I hear that correctly?
Absolutely. Okay. Well, my wife Lee has got a great analogy that we've all been given a playing field in life for healthy living and healthy aging. It's got your gridiron field. Now, the boundaries of the gridiron field are defined by your profile. So for me, if I smoke, I've got the gene variant that cannot get rid of smoke toxins. And you shouldn't smoke in the best of times. It's not good for you. But genetically, I'm more susceptible to both active and passive smoke. Now, the fact that I know that, I don't smoke, I don't put myself in a situation of, in a workplace, for example, where there's a lot of toxins. I know that my percentage body fat's maybe 20%, and I don't exercise, I don't go to the gym, I like bike riding, and I leave it, but I move. I get out and walk. I push my granddaughter around in a pusher, and I do everything I can to move. And I said I've just turned 65 in June, but I know when you look at I think you saw my fat metabolism genes, my ability. They're shockers. They're shockers. But I know, and my inflammation's not good. But I know that my boundary, that if I can have some carbs, if I have too many, then the advantage, then I'm out of the playing field for weight management.
Right.
And so I know, and I can feel it. We've got a saying: your genes are talking, but are you listening? And you might have a glass of wine, glass of pizza, then you got to have that next pizza, and your body's saying, this is not good for you. Then you start listening, and I think that's the biggest thing. It really empowers people. And the number of doctors that I've had come in and practitioners and said, I thought that was going on. I knew it, but I didn't trust myself to back it.
Right.
And now they can, I'm going to back it now. And I think that's the thing. It gives you the freedom. And it's not restrictive. It's actually liberating. It's the same as, again, if you're looking at weight management, the women that have been going to the gym, flogging themselves, when you say, I want you to have spa saunas and massages and don't spend 2 hours on the treadmill, compliance is not a problem.
Yeah, no kidding. I was about to think they think like it's a dream come true. Yeah.
But it works. It works. And then hydrate. So because interventions aren't hard, compliance is better. And as you said, 1 kilogram, 2.5 pound weight loss. And I'm talking about fat loss, not weight loss.
Yeah.
Rid of fat, not muscle, not that. It's achievable, and you can still have a lifetime because you know the boundaries. You know what you can do and can't do. And when you say to the ladies, look, when you go back into the gym, you need to do the resistance work because that is how you burn fat. You won't burn it aerobically. It might take you longer than the skinny binny Jane next to you because she's got a different profile. And they say, I can live with it. If it takes me 8 weeks rather than 4 weeks, it doesn't matter. They just want to know that they have actionable outcomes that have been designed around them as a unique individual and that they work. And I think we're pushing a new concept in research and medicine because I've had a lot of doctors say, where's the clinical trials of 1,000, 10,000 people? And I've told heads of hospitals the fundamental assumption of a clinical trial is flawed because you assume that everyone genetically is the same. It's not true.
Right.
So the big push now into the N=1. You look at a health outcome, not a disease state. You look at a health outcome like reducing blood pressure. You look at it from a systems biology approach and a genetic approach. You try it on one person and see how it works. You try it on the second, third, fourth. So you do N=1 1,000 times and see how many people respond. And we get a far greater response doing it that way than doing one trial, and seeing these trials one person. We are unique.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. The idea that the statistical, giant statistical pools to look at a single intervention, genes have been, it's akin to how male mice were the ones that were only used, or male participants were only used because, the cycling of female hormones was too complicated for the researchers. And the reality is that the genes are the new confounder for research. People aren't looking at individual gene variants before pulling people into studies. And it's just, you absolutely make the correct point that we can't rely on, not that we can't rely, it's like we have to look way more complex microscope because people can respond differently to the same things based on their genes. I wanted to, you mentioned carbohydrates before. I wanted to ask you about the carb choice panel and the food choice panel as well. And if you would talk about, because you mentioned like pizza and stuff like that, let's talk about food choice first, where it's a very interesting panel. It's a very focused panel where you're looking at people's risk for celiac, their ability to deal with lactose, alcohol, caffeine, and salt. And these are, to some people, they're not foods, they're food groups, alcohol, caffeine, salt. And why did you come up with this specific focused gene panel focused on gluten, lactose, alcohol, caffeine / coffee, and salt?
Well, there's sort of some of the main components in our food, and there's a lot of people out there think they're celiac or they're gluten intolerant. Now, yes, there are some genes around whether people are celiac, but even that is not 100% accurate. Sometimes people expect perfection in science. We're not that simple. There's so many interacting things, and the reason we've went to the celiac and the carb choice, which is a separate test. And I'll deal with carb choice first, and I'll come back to the food.
Okay, sure.
In the genetics, there's two types of structure in genetics. There's what they call the genes have SNPs, which is, the way I like to sum it up is, in every cell in our body, we have the book of life. It's called a chromosome. And within the book, there are chapters, which are genes. And within the genes, in the chapters, there's pages, which are within the gene, there's SNPs. And so in the health and well-being, we look at these SNPs like with the pages in the book, in the chapter. And if you want to make a stronger statement in a book, you write more pages around that topic. And the same thing in some of the genes. Like you see, the IL-10s that get rid of inflammation. There's 3 very strong genes there because it's that important to get that under control. But there's also in our genome, there are what they call copy numbers where you repeat the chapter. Mm. And if you really want to make an even stronger statement, you repeat more and more chapters in the book to drive the point home. So our lab is the only lab, the one we use, pardon me, is the only lab in the world testing for what they call copy numbers. And that's the one that controls our ability to break down starch.
Copy numbers of the AMY1 gene, you mean?
The AMY1 gene. Mm. So AMY1 is the gene that produces amylase in the mouth, which breaks down starch. Now, I know we're all growing up, and our mum said, chew your food, chew your food. And that's to get this amylase that starts to break down the starch. Now, when we were hunter-gatherers, we had 1 to 2 chapters or 1 to 2 copy numbers of this, or up to maybe even 3 or 4 of this amylase. Now, if you have 4 copy numbers, you produce twice as much amylase as 2. If you have 8, 4 times. And they've now, 4 years ago, at Imperial College in London, they thought maybe starch could have something to do with obesity and weight management. And what they did, because what happens is when we're hunter-gatherers, we had 2 to 4 copy numbers. Then as we started to migrate and grow crops, we got 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We got more and more copy numbers to generate more amylase to break down the starch. We've even seen people with 18 copy numbers, which is incredibly high. Mm-hmm. Now, when they did research, they found that if we're going to eat what our governments tell us, which was the pyramid, the amount of carbohydrate, we need at least 9 copy numbers or above.
Right.
Now, if you have 8 copy numbers and you eat what our government tells you, your risk of obesity and weight goes up 100%. Copy number 7, if you have a copy number of 2, i.e., if you're genetically like a hunter-gatherer with regard to breaking down starch, and you eat the amount of carbohydrate recommended, your risk of obesity goes up 800%. And that's incredible. So a lot of the weight management issues at the moment is actually starch sensitive. Now, the problem we have, a lot of people that think they're gluten intolerant. It's actually starch intolerant.
That's me. That was absolutely me. See, I had been teaching nutrition for over 15 years, and I was still having really bad digestive problems despite knowing all my farmers, knowing like just sprouting the quinoa, growing it on a full moon, plucking it on the harvest moon, singing low tones. Like I'm making that up, obviously, but just like the whole thing of like having what on paper looks like the perfect diet. And then I ran your carb choice profile, and I realized that I was a 2, that I had the carb metabolism of a hunter-gatherer or Eskimo, that I wasn't gluten intolerant, I was actually carb intolerant. And in fact, on my food choice, it shows I don't have the gluten sensitivity, but what I have been having was carb sensitivity. So within 1 week, just 1 week of drastically cutting my carbs down to my genetic tolerance, my digestive problems of 20 plus years went away. Just incredible.
Yeah, and it's not saying to get rid of all carbs. It's the rice, the wheat.
And volume of it, and the volume of the carbs.
Volume, absolutely, and the timing of the day when we have it, and the resistant starches. If we go back to what we ate as hunter-gatherer, and you look at so this is where our Western diet is our genes just don't like our diet. I was invited to speak to the Malaysian Insurance Institute, and I said, look, we've got all this space-age lifestyle, and we've got a caveman body. It's just, there's a total mismatch, and that's the beauty about with the carb choice. We've seen incredible results, and it's not saying you can't do this or you can't do that. It gives you a roadmap. For example, a couple of the things we touched on before about a glass of red wine and pizza. Red wine suppresses amylase, and the rice suppresses it. So does that mean that you should
on the pizza?
Yeah, but so it says, so should it mean that you should never have a glass of red wine and pizza? No, it means that if you want to have the glass of red wine and pizza, for you need to have your the salad beforehand with balsamic vinegar, because lemon juice and vinegar upregulates the amylase. So it's what they did traditionally to prepare for a meal. You would upregulate your amylase. Then when your amylase is upregulated, you can have your glass of red wine and the pizza, but you need to prepare. So it's not being exclusive. It's saying, what do you need to do for you, not for me? Because I've got a copy number of 5, you're 2. So I can get away with maybe, a little bit more latitude, that my playing field is a little bit bigger than yours for, say, carb sensitivity. But a lot of people that think they're actually gluten intolerant, it's actually starch intolerant, because you need amylase, which then helps break down the starch. And so what happens with a lot of people, they go, okay, I'm gluten intolerant. They jump out of the frying pan into the fire, because all the things they have that don't have gluten, the wheat, the rice, and
wheat has gluten. It's like they usually, this happened to me. This was my story. So I got away from gluten. I went to rice, amaranth, quinoa, and like in the various tapioca. Tapioca is the hidden carb in the paleo haystack. Tapioca and just really high carb things that I thought were gluten-free, but why am I still feeling awful and bloated and I'm having all these digestive issues? And it's because I was avoiding gluten, but I was still going into high carbs, but also these carbs are also higher glycemic index, because the gluten actually slows the glycemic loading, even though gluten has its own complications on its own right. And this was totally what happened to me. So when I realized that I was a 2, such a low copy number, that I was carb sensitive, not gluten sensitive, and my playing field is way smaller. But if I do have carbs, I then implement the strategies like you mentioned, whether it's something acidic right beforehand, or I exercise right before, or I have certain foods that contain citric acid in it to increase amylase, or I time things at different parts of the day. And it's really a gift that when people get their carb choice profile, they become more free around food, because they actually have boundaries and discipline to follow. Like what's what is the dog you let off the leash? The one that's actually disciplined to respond when emergencies respond. You don't let a wild, untrained dog off the leash. So if you actually know what your rules and commands are around food, you have way more freedom to be off the leash, because then you know how you can come back safely.
Well, the bottom line is, when you get your genetic profile, the playing field's so big, and there's, like for me, not to smoke and do some of the other things to stay healthy and improve my, detoxification pathways. It's a no-brainer. I've got all of this playing field. It actually gave me more options, because I didn't know what I could do. It's not what you can't do. It's, so you can't do maybe 5 things. You've got 1,000 things you can do. So it's not restrictive. It actually is liberating. And this is the feedback we get is, hey, I've got so much more of the playing field of healthy living, healthy aging I didn't know I could do.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's really about listening to your own body. Your genes are talking, but are you listening? And you find a lot of elite athletes are very intuitive. After years and years of training, they've actually subconsciously listened to what their body was telling them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be getting to that level. And I think we all do the same. We're becoming, just more in tune with our bodies and getting set free of this one-size-fits-all. This is the only diet you can have, this, and And it saves, the thing with, by doing a genetic profile, the amount of money and time it saves. Because I remember back in 2008 when we were training personal trainers and in the fitness game, one of our personal trainers, a client came and said, the test, it costs this much. And he said, look, it's going to save you money because I spent a year and a half trying to help you lose weight. And how many times have you come, how much money have you spent on me over the last year and a half? We still haven't found out. If we get the genetic profile, we'll be able to get there much quicker. And you're actually going to save a lot of money from this hit and miss.
Oh, I would have paid almost anything to avoid those 20 years of discomfort and embarrassment and pain of the digestive problems I had. And just this simple little genetics test, I wish I had this 20 years ago, and I would have paid logs more to have had it then than to found out about it 20 years after the fact. You're absolutely right. Like the amount of not only money that I would have saved, but the sheer anguish and frustration around my body's reaction to things I didn't realize I was reacting to. I mean, what's that worth? I wanted to ask you, is there anything else you wanted to say about carb choice? Otherwise, I'd like to learn more about food choice.
Well, the carb choice, like for example, we did a trial with Maoris in New Zealand and Europeans, and the results we found were staggering. And one of the guys, he had been a diabetic in 2000. He'd been on medication for 16 years, 3 types of medication. Mm-hmm. He'd had had a heart attack 6 years later, and then he had he'd been on 5 medications for 10 to 16 years. And this is a tradesman. He wasn't an educated academic nutritionist. And after looking at his carb choice, he had a carb choice copy number of 2 like you. The doctor sent the report to him because he lived 3 hours away. He self-managed, and in the first 2 weeks, the doctor had to halve his medication and take him off insulin. After 4 weeks, 2 weeks, then he was off all medication, diabetic. 4 weeks, he was off all. 2.5 years ago, he's now saving $9,000 a year in medication. So it does work. So the reason we went for the food choice is the number of people that say I'm gluten sensitive, I've got celiac. Well, we put the celiac in to find out is it that or not. And for a lot of people, it's not. And we could then go back and say, look, do your carb choice because it could be actually a gluten sensitive. It could be a starch sensitivity, not a gluten sensitivity. So that's why we included that. There's also lactose because a lot of people are lactose intolerant. Yeah, it's very clear on that. And we just found these are some of the major concerns people have. Because our son, when he was born, was 4 weeks early. We thought he could be lactose intolerant. But then, if we'd had this report, we would have known definitively about the lactose and all the other problems. The other reason then we put in the alcohol is the alcohol, when we drink alcohol, it's a 2-stage breakdown. And in the report, it's actually, we had a lot of interest in writing it up because some people can get through the first phase very quickly, which is from a metabolic point of view, it's really good. But it means you're more risk of becoming an alcoholic. Like Europeans, we tend to have that stage, we can get it through. Whereas for the Asians, for example, they get to the first stage and the body can't cope with it and they get what they call the Asian blush or they become nauseous. Right. So we put it in there as being a very important thing to know. Like if you had a teenage child, would you want to know what was their risk of becoming an alcoholic, and would that change you as a parent in how you would educate your children into alcohol?
Fascinating. So just to clarify on that, when people like for me, I have the red variant in the alcohol. I don't drink at all anyway, and I just instinctively have stayed away from it. So
well, your body was telling you it's going, no, it's not good for you.
Well, if your first exposure to alcohol was Manischewitz, you'd be sober too. So that's So I have the red in the alcohol intolerance. So that means that I have this similar issue of not being of getting that flush and feeling ill. So if someone was a green, meaning that they could process alcohol easily, they're at a much higher risk of alcoholism. Did I hear that correctly? Okay, got it.
Yeah, they've had the research to prove that. So if you knew that, and the reason we put that in was because if you look at the corporate sector, like in today's environment, everyone's stressed. And when they get stressed, what do? They'll either go for alcohol, coffee, and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
So we wanted that as a, if you're in that, find yourself in that stage, you're getting stressed at work, you're hitting more alcohol, you'd want to know, is that going to be long-term detrimental, that you've got more risk of becoming an alcoholic? I think that's a very important, useful bit of information. Then you might be a bit more careful about having that extra drink as a result of that. We brought in the caffeine as well because there's some people that, there's the CYP1A2, which is the ability to metabolize, to break down coffee. That impacts on estrogen and risk of breast cancer. It affects things such as cardiovascular. But the other gene we put in there is, if some people, if they've got that variant, they get caffeine-induced anxiety. And a lot of people, they're getting stressed, they have more alcohol or they have more coffee, then they get more anxious, and they think it's from work. It's actually from the caffeine, because they get caffeine-induced anxiety and depression.
You're talking about the ADORA2A gene? Is that what you're referring to?
Yep,
okay.
Yep. So if you know that you're thinking, hey, I'm starting to get a little bit more stressed here, you think, hang on, that's right, if I drink more coffee now, that's contributing to that stress factor. So we felt that the alcohol and the caffeine were very important to how you cope with stress in day-to-day, rather than have it creep up on you and then you find that you could have done something about it. So we found that was very important. Then we also found that the salt was a very important one too, because some people, if they have more than the recommended amount of salt, the risk of hypertension goes up significantly. I remember several years ago, one of our practitioners had a hypertensive patient, and no matter what she did, couldn't help out, and looked at the genes around the salt sensitivity. She just made the person really eliminate the sodium chloride, and the difference it made in her within a couple of weeks was incredible. But without that vital bit of information, she wouldn't have gone more restrictive on the sodium chloride, because we don't realise how much, well, you're fully aware of how much hidden salt there is in our diet.
Right.
There's some people who can't cope with that. And I'll give one classic case is Dr. Chikai, Director of Genetics, who's moved from Australia. He's in Kazakhstan, a wonderful medical university over there. In Kazakhstan, they've got a lot of problems with high blood pressure, and we were dealing with one of the top cardiologists. She could not get her own blood pressure down. We looked at her genetic profile, and it was all around that salt sensitivity genes. Now, in Kazakhstan, they eat up to 6 times the amount of salt in their diet that we would eat.
Wow.
6 times. And yet, they shouldn't even be eating what we've got. And the reason is that historically, they were the warriors. They'd ride the horses, and the best horses they kept, the ones that didn't make the grade, they killed and salted. So to preserve the food, they had salt. And I know that Dr. Chikai, he just loves to come back to Australia to eat non-salty food.
Right.
So when she saw that she had those gene variants and that the amount of salt, she drastically reduced the amount of salt, and the change in her blood pressure in a very short amount of time was incredible. So it's really important, especially for anyone if they have had a history of high blood pressure in the family or heart events for that. So that's the reason we came up with that as a nice intro sort of profile, and to just start to include, people to the, that our genes do control how we respond to, nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle choices.
Yeah, I see that. It just seems like such a very rounded, lifestyle package of having the health and well-being panel, of looking at all the 7 drivers, inflammation, free radicals, liver detoxification, vitamin D, the cardiovascular circulation, and the fat metabolism, knowing what our playing field is with the drivers of disease to increase our health span, and then marrying that to our carb tolerance with the carb choice, which affects basically our macronutrient profile, how many carbs relative to proteins and fats. And if you alter that alone with every meal multiplied by amount of meals per day, by amount of meals for your lifetime, that is a huge epigenetic impact on your entire health. And then looking at these 5 key food experiences that people have in today's modern world, whether it's gluten or dairy, caffeine, alcohol, and salt. 5 real, it's just you're looking at all kind of the major influencers that affect almost everyone in their day-to-day lives. It's just such a wonderful package to be able to offer people for their long-term health span, whatever their goals are. Is it family, a career, a particular, whatever their journey is. You're just giving them their own personal playing field, and I'm just so appreciative that you've put this all together. Truly, it's been amazing.
Yes, and it's only just starting. As I said, I see many years ahead. And
well, you just turned 65. Shouldn't you be retiring?
No. I love doing what I'm doing. To see the number of people's lives all over the world we've impacted, to see women that couldn't get pregnant, the people who had kids with autism, just incredible. Now, those ones are more dealing with our accredited practitioners like yourself.
Right.
But the panel works across the entire health spectrum. We've done national teams, Olympics, we've done the lot, and it's the same underlying biochemical processes control every aspect of our health and well-being. And it's then for your audience that's listening to this, say, well, what health outcome do I want to improve right now? And especially going into the festive season, we all know that we probably don't get as much exercise, and we maybe eat a bit more of the food that may not be as good. But I know the playing field, I know my boundaries. But more importantly, it's not about the health outcome. It's what drives me is seeing my beautiful little grandkids, having a wonderful wife, the little grandkids, and being able to impact their life rather than, and as I said, that's 13 years that I've had that my dad never had.
Right.
And I value every one. And there was a great Australian movie called Break 'em Rant. He made one statement. He said, live every day as if it's your last, because one day it'll be true. And what the profile has given me is the ability to have more of those every day, live it as if you last. And I've got my health expectancy, as I said, I'm not a fanatic. I just know what I need to do based on my blueprint, and I know what's done for my life. I know what's done for others, and you know how it's impacted your life. So I think it's the greatest gift you can give, apart from love of friends and family, is health and journey with people on a healthy life. And, our goal is to make healthcare affordable to everyone and help them improve the health outcomes and achieve whatever health goal it be, whether it be running a marathon. God love you if you want to do that. That's not me, but playing with the grandkids, that's my health goal. So, it's been worth it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Paul. It's a real honor to interview you. I just so appreciate the work that you've done, and I can't wait to see the next iterations of the future panels and see what other interesting things that come about. So thank you again, and I will post this and let people know that the interview is live. And again, thank you so much for your time today.